So, you know how in my very last video I said that I was going to be trying to slow down and take a little bit of a pause from YouTube and uploading? Well, I literally couldn't when it comes to this one because these are my notes for season 2 of Wheel of Time TV show. So it's more like I just need to sit down and film this recap and review at this point so that I can stop adding to my notes. So let's get into it. I have finally gone back and binge watched all of season 2 of Amazon's Wheel of Time TV show from beginning to end, now that we have the entire season to kind of look at as a whole. And I thought that maybe I was not going to like it or still have the problems with it that I had the first time that I was, watching it as just a new viewer, but going into it as someone who kind of had expectations or at least desires for what I wanted to see on screen going into it. And so I know that, and I admitted in my review videos of each episode that that was a big part of what kind of left me wanting with certain episodes, was just not seeing things that as a reader I personally wanted to see, storyline wise. When I was going into this rewatch, I was really just trying to put all of my wants, needs, and expectations as a book reader aside, and like now that I knew what was and wasn't going to happen in terms of plot, and just watch the entirety of the season purely from a TV watcher standpoint and try to just put the books from my mind and decide just what works as an episode of good TV and good storytelling as far as a through line throughout the season and what doesn't. So sit down and get cozy like I have. I'm just sitting on the floor for this one because I've been a little bit congested and sickly. I don't know if that's coming across in my voice for this video or not. I'm sure it is. But like I said, I have to get my thoughts about this season out of my head so that I can stop obsessing over them at least a little bit, which I'll get into that more later. But for this video, I am strictly going to be giving a review for each episode of season 2 and then just a few overall thoughts and summary at the end. But I'm going to be saving the majority of my season 3 predictions for a separate video. So for each episode in this season, I have ranked it out of 5 white flames of Tar Valon, just to be fun with it. So with that said, let's go through each episode and I'll give you my ranking and just a few quick thoughts of overall what worked and didn't work for me. Just little rapid fire bullet points because yeah, like I said, these are my notes that I was taking going back and watching each episode, so I'm going to be trying to make cohesive sense out of this for you guys as best as I can. So episode 1 was A Taste of Solitude. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 flames. I started with a little bit of a higher ranking because I did think it was a really solid first episode and a solid beginning to season 2 overall, but just when having to adjust the scale a little bit and like grade on a curve compared to other episodes and how strongly they ended up ranking for me, this ended up being a 3.5 out of 5 because I felt like even though for storytelling reasons we were getting everyone else musing on their presumed loss of Rand and how that's been impacting everybody, but I definitely kind of personally felt like this episode needed more Rand. I liked what we saw of Tower politics. I liked that we saw more of Elias and the whole like Perrin Wolf brother thing coming to the forefront. I liked the brief appearance, as brief as it was, of Bael Domon, and I really hope we see more of him in season 3 because I've been reading The Shadow Rising, which that season's going to be heavily based on, and he is a more prominent character along with Tom. I know Tom is confirmed to be returning for next season, and so I really hope that since we've had Bael Domon introduced in season 2 that we will be seeing more of him as we do in the plot for Tanchico in season 3. And I really did like the little face-off scene between Nynaeve versus Liandrin with the power, and just seeing what a fight between two channelers could look like. And just their personal like rivalry and relationship has been interesting to see play out through the 2 seasons. While I did enjoy seeing Lan 1v3 fades, I did not enjoy Moraine 1v1ing a Fade or Myrddraal in hand-to-hand combat, because they're supposed to just be like notoriously difficult to kill, even for like warders, even for battle-trained and hardened soldiers. Like, it's just, they're physically stronger and were made with a kind of a form of the power and science. So I feel like it would be really hard for someone like Moraine with no abilities in terms of like magical power to just be able to 1v1 a Myrddraal like that. As cool and impactful as it was to see, that was just a little bit too unrealistic for me personally. Episode 2 is Strangers and Friends, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 Flames of Tar Valon, because I really enjoyed seeing the Lanfear and Rand scenes play out, especially knowing what we know about who she really is. And I just thought that the acting and the way the scenes between them were written was done very well. I enjoyed the brief moments of seeing Moraine and Lan both sulking after their misadventures in the last episode. I love seeing more Elias. Love seeing Uno being Uno in this episode for the brief moments that we got to see him. R.I.P. Uno, we lost you too soon. And I did enjoy this like brief little, what I called like Rand's Fight Club moment when he was beating up that guy, when we see this little brief glimpse of him kind of not being able to control Saidin and going full Dark Randon. So yeah, I guess him being there and working there was a trick on Rand's part, just not on Errol, as Errol suspected. And I also loved seeing Mat being Mat in this episode. Like I said in my episode reviews, the Mat was matting for me all season, and I loved seeing his portrayal in season 2. And I think the other reason why I ranked this episode so strongly is because it featured all of the main characters and all of the Emond's Fielders, but it still managed to have a good pacing. With some of the other episodes in this season that tried to feature all of the characters, did not have as good of an overall pacing. Episode 3, What Might Be, where we see Nynaeve's accepted test. That was, I think, maybe not as impactful as I would have liked compared to some of her tests in the novels. I think I just would have liked to see more of this like underlying current of suspense and unease that Nynaeve feels the whole time, this like strange sense of subconscious urgency that she's not quite sure where it's coming from. So I felt like some of the mood of those scenes and those tests could have been conveyed more strongly, but overall I think this was a good episode. I gave it 4 out of 5 Flames again. But yeah, I think overall I had to wonder at some points if the fake out of her leaving and being trapped was a little bit meh overall. But I think by the end of it I did end up coming back around and deciding that it did work for me, just in terms of storytelling for TV show wise. Because it keeps people on their toes, even as a book reader. It keeps this kind of sense of suspense for an audience within an episode, but then we see some of these things resolved or wrapped up within 1 or 2 episodes, so it's not played out too much. I loved the brief moments that we got with Logain and his portrayal, and just the actor really milking every scene he's in for everything it's worth. And looking forward to seeing more of him, hoping we see more of him after the whole Tower storyline that I feel like we are definitely building up toward in season 3. Episode 4, Daughter of the Night, is another one I had highlighted as a standout for me personally. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 white flames. For one thing, we get Hopper in this episode. Love Hopper, and I loved how long we got to see him tag along with Perrin and bond with him in this season. Loved seeing Lanfear's release at the beginning and how that was portrayed. I liked the little scene that we got of Liandrin versus Liane, which is Siuan's keeper, or her second in command, where again we're seeing kind of these seeds being planted and set up for the Tower split plot. So I like seeing those little seeds being planted already. And I, again, liked the little interactions and scenes that we get between Rand and Lanfear in this episode. And we also not only got Liandrin's reveal as a dark friend, but Lanfear's reveal as Lanfear. And on top of that, Moiraine's then full Gone Girl moment that she had with Lanfear. So a lot of highlights. I think at first, as a book reader, I was stunned, gooped, gagged, shooketh when this happened because it was totally newly introduced by the showrunners. But like I said, in terms of putting all book expectations aside and just watching these episodes front to back for a TV audience and trying to decide, was this entertaining? Did it work? Did it not work? I was thoroughly entertained and I was shocked, so I do have to hand it to them. And so yeah, this episode, Daughter of the Night, with featuring Lanfear so strongly and getting her reveal as a Forsaken, it ended up working for me, and I love the actress and her portrayal of Lanfear this season, so 4.5 out of 5 flames for this one. Next, we have episode 5, which is Damani, which try listening to the audiobook and telling the difference between Damani, as in the leashed women used by the Seanchan, and Domani, as in a person from Arad Doman. But I gave this episode 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was kind of just a lot of build up to other storylines and then like a little bit of a filler episode in my opinion. But I love Varen and seeing her character introduced and her storylines introduced because she's a really strong character in the novels and an important one. And I felt like the pacing of this episode was okay. I loved seeing Aviendha and the fight choreography for her scene against the White Cloaks, but overall I felt like the whole Damodred family plot line was a little bit meh. I know it ended up being stated by the showrunners that one of the reasons we didn't get the Ingtar is a dark friend reveal in the finale was that we had already gotten the Barthanes as a dark friend reveal previously, and so they felt like it was too repetitive, but I don't know. Overall, just for the payoff that we ended up getting for that storyline, like I've said, I do understand why, with Rosamund Pike being like the A-list actress and like the leading actress for the show, why Moiraine is being featured more prominently as a main character, whereas in the novel she takes a little bit more of a backseat to the Emond's Field 5. And I'm okay with it because personally, like, I love Moiraine as a character and we don't see a lot of it, like we don't get a lot of POV or insight into her and her perspective on things in the books, and I wish that we did because we're just getting a lot of other characters' perspective of her and their feelings toward her and like how secretive she is. So it's interesting seeing more of her and her perspective in the show, but just with the overall arc of the storyline between her and interacting with her family compared to like where we could have gotten more payoff in other storylines, the Damodreds were not really doing it for me as a whole. And so I think, yeah, this episode was just didn't have as many strong standout moments compared to others, and it was just more setting up plot and advancing the plot, especially compared to the next episode, which was episode 6, Eyes Without Pity. And if you ask me, the Eyes Without Pity belong to Egwene, especially with the ruthless way she ended her Sul'dam by the season finale. So I ended up giving this episode 5 out of 5 white flames, because we get to spend a lot of time with Egwene and seeing her capture as a Damani, and them just trying to break her down and completely separate herself from her identity, not only as a woman and an Aes Sedai, but as an entire person. And she says, "No ma'am, not today, Satan. I have always been and will always be an Egwene stan." And then I also really loved seeing the reunion between Rand and Mat in this episode. It was beautifully played and portrayed, and like Mat wiping the little tears from his eye. I was getting teary-eyed, so I loved that. And I also really liked the scenes that we got between Elaine and Nynaeve in this episode, because they end up spending, like I said in my review, a lot of time together in the novels and just contrasting and like being the odd couple. So I loved seeing some of that play out already, and seeing Elaine being introduced and incorporated into the cast of main characters so fluidly and easily as she was in the show, despite it being different from the novels. I think they did a really great job of introducing her character and letting us know who she is as a character right away with the way that she is portrayed in her scenes. As devastating and brutal and difficult as it was to watch, seeing Rima Sedai and her sacrifice at the end was, again, from a TV watching perspective, really well done. The show in season 2 has done a really thorough job of conveying to the audience just how unlikable and problematic a lot of Shan-Chan culture is, and also introducing and conveying just how much of a problem and a threat they are going to be to deal with for Rand and Randland as a whole. Because his goal is going to be to supposedly unite everyone under one banner of the Dragon Reborn to fight the last battle against the Shadow, but of course everyone has their own ideas of what that is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to be done. So yeah, this was a strong episode, but then in episode 7 the scale kind of tips back down for me with Dice Daimar, which means the Game of Houses, which I felt like we could have seen a little bit more of in this episode. Maybe the game being played was between like Moiraine and Swan and Rand and all of them, as opposed to like Kyrian culture as a whole. But I ended up giving this episode 3 out of 5 flames, because while I do love and cherish the cameo that we get by Hayley Mills herself doing the foretelling as Gitara Sedai, a lot of the rest of this episode I just felt like the pacing was a little off, and I think I said in my episode reviews that this was kind of where a lot of the threads of the storytelling that they were trying to bring back together got a little bit slippery and messy for me, in terms of just trying to tie all the threads back together in a neat little bow. Which I understand that, the showrunners and writers really had their work cut out for them with that in a lot of ways with season 1 and season 2. But yeah, I think just a lot of the storytelling aspects did not work for me as much in this episode from a book reader and just show watcher point of view. I really did like the scene where Rand faced the Oberlin seat finally, but their whole escape just felt a little bit messy to me. I did think that the whole scene with Mat and his Ishi mushroom trip was strongly acted and impactful. I'm not really sure what it added to the storyline overall, which I'll get back into that a little bit more in the summary, because I'm going to go over characters and their arcs and what overall worked and didn't work for me with that. But yeah, maybe that time could have been spent with him elsewhere. I understand why it needed to happen for a Mat character growth and character development perspective, but with the whole storyline overall and the pacing feeling especially rushed between this episode and the finale, I'm just kind of wondering where else we might have spent our time with that scene, as good and as fun and as entertaining as it was to watch. But yeah, the whole escape with Rand and Moiraine was a little bit messy, but I also wrote that so was Swan in this episode, to be honest. She'd be acting a little bit messy, if you ask me. And I wonder if that's gonna come back to bite her. But I'll get into that, if not in this video, then in the next Wheel of Time video. And then in terms of episode 8, the season finale, What Must Be, maybe that is kind of my overall criticism of this episode as a whole, and one of the criticisms that I have within this season as a whole is having to write for what must be in terms of plot. I did end up giving this episode a solid 4 out of 5 flames, because while I'm sad we didn't get the full insight into Ingtar as a character, I understand why. Apparently he just wasn't as impactful or as important to general show audiences as other characters were this season, so that was another reason why just test audiences weren't as impacted by the reveal of him being a dark friend. Overall in the episode, going back and rewatching it this time, I did feel like his death was more impactful watching it this time than it was the first time, just because it didn't meet all of my expectations, but it was an impactful scene. Egwene is definitely still girl boss of this whole season to me. I did enjoy Matt's horn and spear moments, but the whole play out of the stabbing, as I said, ended up being a little anticlimactic for me. And the final boss fight between the EF5, EF5 is kind of a fun an ironic abbreviation because it's like Emmons Field 5, but EF5 is also the strongest tornado. Anytime the EF5 do show up in your area, it's pretty much the equivalent of having an EF5 tornado come through. Overall, the final boss fight between the EF5 and Ishii didn't work for me, just storytelling and pacing wise, and just with what I felt like Ishamael should be able to do with the power as a Forsaken. I don't know why he was just toying with them the whole time. Also, R.I.P. Hopper. I hope that we do see more of him in the future with Perrin and the Wolf Dream, because I know we're going to be getting a lot more of Teleron Riyadh, and the World of Dreams overlaps a lot with the Wolf Dream that Perrin is going to learn as part of his Wolf of Brother abilities. So I hope we get more of that, since I know Season 3 is supposed to focus a lot on Perrin in particular. But let's talk about season as a whole. So as I said, Rafe Judkins, I do think it's also ironic that the book author and the showrunner have the same initials, Robert Jordan, Rafe Judkins. RJ confirmed that Ingtar's dark friend reveal was not only cut for time because of too many other plot threads and characters to follow, but just, yeah, because it was just not playing well with test audiences after Barthanas' reveal. But personally, I would have rather switched them as a book reader and gotten one for the other. And I hope that we do maybe get to see that somewhere down the line as a deleted scene somewhere. And I'm wondering if maybe Elias could reveal later to Perrin that he smelled that Ingtar was a dark friend, because in the books and even in the show they recruit Elias to be their sniffer, because he's supposed to be able to sniff dark friends and sniff out places where evil and just bad things have happened. So I'm wondering if he would have been able to just smell that all over Ingtar, and we'll maybe drop that on Perrin later, that oh hey, by the way, he was a dark friend. I could smell it on him the whole time. So that might be a way they're still able to work that in somehow. I did think that the scene at the beginning of this season where Egwene admires the Amyrlin Seat's empty robes is kind of a sad metaphor for Siuan's absence this whole season. I mean, I do have to acknowledge that we did only see her as the Amyrlin in a few episodes in season 1, but I just felt like we were really missing her presence and her point of view this season, especially regarding the whole Rand and Moiraine thing, because yeah, it just seemed like she showed up and had an abrupt 180 shift in perspective when it came to Rand and Moiraine and what they should or should not be doing. And I kept maintaining that it had to be an act, and I'm hoping that even with the looks that her and Moiraine were exchanging at the very end when she was just lying on the ground, but she kind of I felt raised her eyebrows, Moiraine looked back hesitantly at her, and I feel like there was a moment where Siuan raised her eyebrows at Moiraine to be go Fly, you fool. But either way, I think that's probably going to be the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the Hall of the Tower is concerned with Swan and her role as the Amyrlin seat. And will just be another accusation to add to the pile against her and try to bring her down next season, is that she let Rand get away. And they might accuse her of deliberately being in on it with Moiraine to let him escape. I feel like they started really strongly with Nynaeve's story arc in the beginning, but they kind of dropped the ball with her in the season finale. I know it's just part of her whole block, and that's going to be hopefully addressed more next season. But I did feel like her being blocked in episode 8 was just mostly for plot reasons, in terms of not being able to fully heal Rand of the wound in his side, because that just has to happen for plot reasons. So yeah, I know that they've said that season 3 is going to be focusing more on Rand and Perrin, but I feel like just because they've said that doesn't mean that we're going to be leaving out her or Egwene or the Supergirls entirely, because we do know, it has been confirmed, that Tanchico is going to be a setting, and that Elaine and Nynaeve are the ones in Tanchico in The Shadow Rising. So just because they're focusing more on Rand and Perrin, Rand with the Aiel and Perrin going back to the Two Rivers, that doesn't mean we're not going to still get episodes with the whole Tower arc and with the Tanchico arc and like the hunt for the Black Aja that we've been building up to these 2 seasons so far. So yeah, I hope that we're going to still see Nynaeve and see her overcome her block in season 3, and that we're also just going to see more of her and Elaine's hilarious relationship dynamic. And I really hope that since now we know that Moghedien is in the show as the next Forsaken in line to go up against, that we are going to see epic Nynaeve versus Moghedien face-off like we do in the novel. It definitely stands out in my mind as one of the highlights of the series for me. Not only Nynaeve overcoming her personal block, but also then her facing off against one of the Forsaken. I do wish that they'd done a little bit more with Bail Domon than we saw of him. I do know we get more of him and of Tom in the Tanchico plotline, and so I'm hoping that we will get more of them in season 3 with that, and hopefully maybe a little bit more of Lan's backstory and his personal war against the Shadow. I feel like we haven't really gotten a lot of that so far. We've spent a lot of time on like him and Moiraine and like their bond together as Aes Sedai and Warder, and we know the reasons now, like why she chose him and why she admires him so much, and so we've gotten some hints at that. But yeah, we haven't really gotten a lot of insight in the show to him in terms of his personal mission and kind of suicide mission against the Shadow. Like, he believes it is his destiny to die in the Blight facing the Shadow in vengeance for his fallen kingdom. But now he has Nynaeve, who's giving him a reason to not fulfill that duty as he sees it. So I do kind of have this criticism of season 2 overall, of points where I felt like maybe we were getting a little bit too much Lan and Moiraine, and so like I was wondering, like, yeah, do we get too much of them over all of this season? And my answer was yes, especially in episode 8. Like, I was fast forwarding really quickly through the scene of like them getting their bond back as Warder and Aes Sedai on the beach, and it was like over 30 seconds of just this scene of them being bonded back together again, when I'm like, okay, this is already like a really rushed episode where you had to cut things for time. Did we really, like, I get it was very moving and cinematic, but did we really have to spend that much time focusing on that one thing in particular, when that focus, again, maybe in that time could have been better spent elsewhere? So there were definitely some places where I feel like I understand why we're getting more of them and spending more time on them as characters compared to the novels, and times where there was maybe a little bit too much time spent focusing on them. So yeah, I'm hoping if now we're going to get a little bit more of this triangle playing out where his allegiance and alliance is torn between Moiraine and Nynaeve. And I am wondering if, you know, this whole thing is abound with spoilers, but yeah, I am wondering, with Moraine being so prominent in the show as a character, and with them already fake out stilling her in the show, will they fake out kill her like they do in the books? Because she goes away and spends a lot of the rest of the series off screen. And so I'm wondering if they're going to condense the 2 doorway ter'angreal that we see in the novels, one in Tyr and one in the Waste, to just 1 doorway ter'angreal that they will find at the heart of Rhuidean. And so yeah, to get into more of that and like just more season 2 thoughts as a whole, and with the whole, especially like the whole like focus on Moraine and Lan thing, I do still maintain that her portrayal in this season is book accurate in terms of like hiding Rand is alive and like hiding her own failure re Ishamael and that she's been stilled, because she, in the novels, like I said, we don't get a lot of her perspective as a character. We don't get a lot of insight into her thoughts and feelings and like what she's doing, what she's planning, because we're always looking at her from the outside from other characters' perspectives. So I was trying to not only keep that in mind rewatching this season, but also with a lot of the emphasis and tension between Moraine and Lan in this season, keep in mind that everyone is really worried at the beginning, especially Lan, and I can definitely see why he's a little bit angry at her, and especially angry that she's keeping him out and not letting him into any of her thoughts and feelings, because it is a very real concern that if Moraine kills herself from sadness over being stilled while she is still bonded to Lan, that the emotional and magical blowback from that, and that bond suddenly being severed and no longer there, will make Lan want to kill himself too. On top of, as I said, his already pre-existing death wish to go die in the Blight for his country. So there are very real concerns over her and where her state of mind is, especially from him, because her state of mind and her future actions are going to have a very big impact on him and his state of mind and his actions. So it does make even more sense like why he's very angry and concerned that she won't tell him anything. And so I'm just hoping, as a book reader and just knowing how prominent of a plot point warder bonds are later down the line, that maybe that is why we've been spending so much time in these first 2 seasons exploring the warder bond and explaining it so much. And I do have to say, I have while I did have a lot of criticism watching the episode where Siuan faces Rand and Moraine and chastises her for not keeping Rand in line and doing more with him, and I was like very confused and was like, this is not my Amyrlin seat. Siuan would never. But now that I've gone back, I don't not only rewatched that, but started rereading The Shadow Rising. We do get this scene at the very beginning of Shadow Rising between Siuan and Min, where Siuan does come off angry at Moraine for not keeping a tighter leash on Rand and just letting him go all over the country and like go take the Stone of Tyr and do whatever he wants, and like not trying to goad him where they want him to go like they had agreed they were going to. And it does fit with her attitude in episode 7. But like, at the end of the day, women still can't teach men to channel, so just lay off Moraine a little bit, okay? And then with Perrin and his overall character arc, I do know it has been confirmed, I believe, that Faile, his future love interest, has been cast. So I'm hoping we're going to see her in season 3. I'm really curious to see how she's going to be introduced into the show. But I do feel like that is one of the main reasons, story-wise, that they decided to not only give him a wife in the show, but then also have him lose her, and lose her in the way that he does, like by his own anger, or like lack of anger management skills, because losing his wife how he did will add to his reasons and reluctance behind not only just using his strength and his wolf powers, but also his reluctance to enter into a new relationship with Faile, because in the books it doesn't really end up making a whole lot of sense. And at the end of the day, I know that I was just really sick and tired of Perrin and his whining by the end of the series, and his just like reluctance to step up and be a leader for his people, because he just keeps feeling like he's not worthy. But yeah, I feel like the show is really doing a good job of laying down the groundwork for his future character arc and character development, and just really driving it home to the audience, like why he's going to have so much reluctance to not only tap into his innate powers and abilities, but also his reluctance to like step into this role that he was kind of meant to play among his people, because they, need someone to lead them through all of these crazy times, and his reluctance to get involved into a new relationship with someone. But overall, I think my biggest criticism with this season, and the reason why certain storytelling aspects didn't work for me, was that some of the writing, especially around like the last 2 episodes, while I understand they were really trying to tie all the loose story threads back together, some of the writing came a little bit too close to my key criticism of the Rings of Power TV show, which was that there were times when it seemed like they were just trying to write around these predetermined big moments that they needed to get to or needed to have happen, and it didn't really so much matter how they got there or if it worked within the storytelling, so long as they got to those moments, those predetermined big moments that they needed to. And that they were writing episodically rather than for the overall season story arc as a whole. Because my biggest criticism with the Rings of Power was that they were adding a lot of these mystery plots and like cliffhangers each episode just to keep people watching, and there were a couple moments like that this season, some like fake out gotcha moments, which I think were more just meant less as a like mystery box meant to keep people hooked, and more just to like especially keep book readers on our toes and keep us guessing about what was gonna happen. It didn't go as far into those storytelling tropes as the Rings of Power show did, thankfully, but some of it was really towing that line for me. But like I said, I think overall where they did kind of have like mysteries or surprises or fake outs, they at least didn't drag it out for the sake of dragging it out to keep people watching. It was, just more to have like an impact within that episode, and then they were resolved. Overall, the season worked because there was a contrast from season 1, where all of the characters started out together and got separated, to in season 2, now they were all starting separated and came back together. So it still maintained that one thing that I said that the Rings of Power show lacked, which was that sense of fellowship. But my other biggest gripe that I have over these streaming shows in general, and especially things like Wheel of Time, where we are trying to condense so much plot into such a limited run series and limited run each season with the amount of episodes that we're getting, I don't understand why there is this reluctance and outright refusal on the part of these streaming services to just let these episodes of these streaming shows be as long as needed. Like, there's no commercials, we know we're sitting down to binge watch at least an hour or more of of TV for these long form content episodes. This is streaming. It's not cable TV where we have like a set time block of like 1 hour time block that we fill and that's all we get. Let each episode be as long as it needs to be to tell the story within that episode. Give me a Sherlock miniseries contained within each season where we get a 90-minute episode if that's what needs to happen to tell that story. Going back to character arcs, like with Matt, was there even a point to him going to Kyrian? He got to reunite with Rand, but then he just left to go to Falme right away. So I'm not sure why he went there at all, because he didn't even help Rand escape like I thought he might. And so his character arc was basically just to spend all season feeling sorry for himself after he abandoned everyone last season, you know, like feeling worthless and like his friends all forgot about him, which is a lie. They did not all forget about him, but like his inner saboteur was just really running the show all season. And so I think that is the main reason why we did get that weird kind of seemingly out of place mushroom tea trip for him, since we didn't get the portal stone scene with the flicker and people got to see all their different lives play out and see different choose your own adventure scenarios play out within their own lives. The character that flicker ends up having the biggest character impact on is Matt, because he does see an alternate timeline in that where he does something really bad to Rand in particular, presumably like betrays him as being the Dragon Reborn and either like turns him in or does harm him in some way. We don't get to see specifically what happened to Matt, but whatever it was, it really causes a big impact to him as a character and makes him just personally vow to never do that. And no matter how he feels about Rand being a male channeler or being the Dragon Reborn, he's never going to betray his friend like that. So I do think that that is the reason why we focused on him in that scene in the show, and on him seeing things play out and being told, hey, this is a thing that you could do to your friend. He's the one that the flicker has the biggest impact on as a character. And so I think that the mushroom tea, as like weird as it seems, that was meant to be Matt's flicker moment. As much as like certain things didn't work for me, or I just felt like weren't as neatly wrapped up or like didn't fit together as neatly as I would have liked just from a storytelling perspective, overall I am okay with the changes that they are making a majority of the time, because I can see where the writers are going with them and like why they're necessary to lay down certain plot threads now that are going to pay off in the long run, because so far they do end up paying off in the long run. It's just necessary with a book series that's this long and this dense to have changes and adaptations for a TV show audience who's not been in this world before, and just to, plant seeds for future storylines. The books are very long, very detailed, and in a lot of ways, especially rereading these books now compared to the show, the Emond's Field Five grew up very sheltered villagers, and in the books it shows, especially when it comes to things like sexual immaturity, conservative small town rural values, and then especially like their whole culture shock when they get to different countries. It just gets a little old really fast, especially and so I'm glad that they're like maturing the characters in a lot of ways for the show. The Emond's Fielders in particular just come off as really sheltered, really sexually inexperienced, and so they're just always like shocked and aghast at like how revealing the outfits of people in other countries are, like what they're doing or how they're acting. And then like Rand in particular, for a world where women are in power, Rand has this like obsessive need to protect women at all costs. Like, I get it, because for him it just becomes like his personal boundary and like line in the sand that he doesn't ever want to cross to kind of maintain some grip on sanity and humanity. But yeah, it just gets old really fast. Egwene in particular, I do understand why book readers in particular like have a problem with her as a character, because she does at certain points, especially when she's interacting with the boys, come off as an insufferable know-it-all, Hermione times 10. And so I'm glad that so far we're seeing a lot of that toned down with her. For me, especially watching back, the Forsaken were the highlight of the season, and I especially heart Lanfear and the way that she was portrayed. I am definitely really bad at math, because for some reason I kept saying that, like, oh, there's only 6 seals and 6 of this and 6 of that, so there's 6 Forsaken. But yeah, 6 seals plus Ishi plus Lanfear already freed equals 8, duh. So yeah, I think we definitely are gonna get 4 male and 4 female Forsaken. So we've had Ishamael, and then we did get Samael name dropped by Luz Theron in the episode 8 Cold Open. I'm wondering if we're going to get Asmodean with the Rudian plotline. Yeah, Shamael, Samael, Asmodean, and then I think we're either gonna get Robin for the Andor plotline, or maybe still Demandred, I'm not sure. And then I'm curious how Mazrim Taim is gonna fit into all of this, if he might be combined with another Forsaken, as it was rumored he may be in the book. As a book reader, let me know how you would feel if we did get Taimandred in the show. The 4 female Forsaken, we have Lanfear, Moghedien, and then we have had Randall name dropped, and I think the 4th one is going to be Samaraj, because she has the biggest impact in terms of plot lines. And I did think it was an interesting swap at the end of the show versus the books, because in the books, Rand fights alone and Egwene needs help to escape, and then in the show, Egwene fights alone and Rand needs help. To briefly get into some season 3 speculation, but I'm gonna save most of that for my next video, because I am going to do an entire deep dive and breakdown into The Shadow Rising and go through the book chapter by chapter to try to determine like what I think will and won't make it into the show, specific like scenes or like moments between characters that I would love to see it make it into the show. But just for a couple brief things that I know we have had confirmed just from articles and videos that I've watched so far, I'm wondering if the change that we saw with Nynaeve being stuck in the Archway Terangrial, if that meant that she was physically stuck in Talaran Riyadh, because we know that those Terangrials work by interacting somehow with the world of dreams, and that it is really dangerous to physically be in the world of dreams, because you can die or just be seriously injured, and that it just kind of does something to you and like your spirit and your soul to be physically in there. And so I'm wondering if that's gonna have an impact on her. I saw a brief like mention in an article like when it was plots for season 3 that about like Nynaeve having dreams, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Egwene's the Dreamwalker. But if Nynaeve was stuck in the world of dreams when she was stuck in that Terangrial world, maybe there's gonna be like some part of her that's still tied to it. That might be the way that Egwene gets introduced to it, because I'm curious how Egwene is going to be introduced to it, especially if she does not end up going back to the tower, because it's still up in the air for me who will and won't briefly go back to the tower. Because Egwene has to go to the Waste for training, and the others have to go to Chico for that plot line. So I don't know if anyone's gonna go back to the tower. I'm pretty sure in the books they briefly do, but then leave again. But I know that it's been confirmed that Tenchico and the Aiel Waste and Ruidian are going to be settings for season 3, and that we are going to be seeing Lanfear and teasing at seeing perhaps other Forsaken, specifically in disguise, was mentioned. So I'm thinking that's going to be Lanfear and Asmodean in disguise. Also heard it rumored that we might have seen someone who could have been Gaul on set. So I'm really hoping that we're going to see Gaul and Ruark, because they're 2 of my favorites. And I'm wondering, with the whole Cairhien plotline, since we didn't get the assassination of a king of Cairhien like was supposed to happen, and there's a queen of Cairhien, I know in the novels that Rand ends up really butting heads and having to go up against this noblewoman named Colliver. So I'm wondering if the queen is kind of going to be merged with that character in the show. Because I know we're supposed to see like some Carrion, like some of like Kyrian versus the Shido. And so with Ruidian being a setting and Lanfear and possibly Asmodean being there, I'm wondering in The Shadow Rising, we do see a brief glimpse of the access keys to the Choden Call being in Ruidian, if we are going to get the Choden Call, because just the concept of them is really cool and one of the coolest things about the books in my opinion, so we better get the Choden Call. Yeah, we also are going to see Dreamwalking introduced, which I can't wait for because that's one of my favorite things, and we're also going to see the Sea Folk introduced, and we're going to see the Shido introduced. So yeah, I'm wondering if we're going to see the EF5 split at the beginning of season 3, and if we are going to skip Tyr in favor of just Rand going straight to the Ideal Waste and Egwene going with him. I'm wondering how mad she's gonna be at him still for the whole him faking his death thing, especially after rewatching season 2, because like Egwene says a lot about how she's only went to the tower and been pushing herself as hard as she has because of the impact that she's been dealing with, the personal guilt that she's been dealing with of Rand supposedly dying at the Eye of the World, and if she had been ready and if she had been more trained more and been stronger in the power, she could have saved him. But yeah, actually, turns out you didn't need to do any of that and push yourself that hard because, surprise, he's still alive. Oops, my bad. I hope she's still gonna be a little bit mad at him, because I know in the novels, and then I'm wondering if we might see Nynaeve and Elaine and possibly also Mat stop by the tower before going to Tanchico, or if maybe they'll even stop in Caemlyn first. Right now, everyone thinks the daughter heir of Andor is missing and possibly kidnapped, so Elaine, I'm wondering if she's going to feel some kind of obligation or sense of duty to let people know that she's fine, or if she's just going to remain at large. Because I know that they have been casted, and at some point people need to meet Elida and meet Elaine's brothers Galad and Gowan, and that originally they meet at the tower. So I'm wondering if we're still gonna see that happen somehow. I think in the novels, at least some of them will have to go back to the tower to bring the Horn of Valyr and bring the dagger back there for safekeeping and storage. And like Mat will need to be fully healed of it now that they have it. So I'm thinking that maybe Elaine will feel a sense of duty to return, and like Nynaeve might go with her because she feels like she has to get over her block because of all the shit that went down that she couldn't help with at the finale. And then like Mat might have to go with them because he is tied to the horn and the dagger now, and that might be a way that all of them can be introduced to Elaine's brothers before they leave again. So I'm curious to see how some of these characters will be introduced with like some of the changes that they had to make. But yeah, stay tuned because I am going to do an entire deep dive and breakdown of The Shadow Rising and what I think and hope will be making it into seasons 3 and possibly 4. So thanks for sticking with me for this. I know it was probably really rambling as I tried to make sense of my copious amount of scribbled little notes here. But yeah, as I said, despite my vow to myself to take it easy, I just had to sit down and wrap this all up for you all and give you all my thoughts on the season as a whole so that I could stop going back and wanting to add to my notes. I kept watching the episode and being like, oh, I missed that last time. Like, let me write that down so I can make a note of it later. I'm like, no, we're not going through and doing breakdowns and Easter eggs for this. We're just doing summary and review. So yes, I had to refrain from even throwing too much into this video, and it's still clocking in at an hour long right now. So with that, I will leave you, and until next time, stay classy.